Okay, good morning everybody. Welcome back to the Morning Bible. That's a weird way to start. Okay. Hope you're doing well. It's another wet hair episode, but filmed on a different day, weirdly. We are going on now to the crucifixion. We've got a really big passage coming up today, so I won't do too much preamble because we've got quite a lot to get through. But essentially the decision has been made to crucify Jesus. It was the crowd telling Pilate to do it. Pilate didn't really want to do it, but he gave in to the crowd's pressure and said, okay, we're going to crucify him then. We're going to free this guy called Barabbas, who was sort of guilty of murder. He's allowed to go free, but Jesus, who is innocent, is going to be sent to the cross. And so this is what they do with him. And as they led him away, they seized one Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, and laid the cross on him to carry it behind Jesus. So, the book of Luke doesn't talk about, what's the word? It's scourge, isn't it? Yeah, the scourge. So, scourging is a horrible word, firstly, but the scourging would have been a bit of torture that would have happened to Jesus before. He would have been flogged basically within an inch of his life. A lot of people often died from the scourging that happened, the flogging that happened before they even got to the cross, because it was that brutal of a beating. We don't get that in the book of Luke. Luke doesn't tell us that bit, but it's recorded in Matthew and I think John as well. They talk about how Jesus was scourged. And so a lot of the time, the criminals, but Jesus isn't a criminal here. The person who's convicted would be expected to carry their own cross. And so the cross would have been this huge piece of wood, kind of in a T-shape, a lowercase T-shape, in the case of Jesus. And they would be expected to have it on their back and carry it. Now it's a massive, heavy piece of timber, so it's really hard to do. And if Jesus has just been beaten and tortured, then he's going to be very weak and struggle to carry this cross. And so it says as they led him away, so we don't really know who they is, but it's the people who are essentially taking Jesus to be put to death. They seized a guy called Simon of Cyrene. This isn't the same Simon as Jesus' follower, Simon Peter. It's a different guy. This guy's just come in from the countryside, doesn't really know what's going on, but they grab him and they make him carry Jesus' cross, supposedly because Jesus is too weak to carry it. And there followed him a great multitude of the people and of the women who were mourning and lamenting for him. But turning to them, Jesus said, just before we say what Jesus said, sorry, it's going to be a long video, there were people who were mourning Jesus. Like when you talk about the sort of crowd that were yelling to crucify him, that isn't all of the people who are there. That isn't all the people following Jesus. And, I think sometimes it's quite easy to paint everyone in that crowd as being sort of a follower of Jesus and blah, blah, blah. But a lot of them either wouldn't have been followers of Jesus or wouldn't have been present at the time. And so, the actual followers of Jesus, they are horrified and they're saddened by what they're seeing. And so they're crying, and a lot of them are women. But Jesus turned to them and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming when they will say, Blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, Cover us. For if they do these things when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?" And so Jesus' words of comfort aren't really that comforting here. These women are crying. These women are, they're really sort of shocked and saddened by what they're seeing with Jesus. Jesus is saying, don't cry for me, cry for yourselves. Like, he isn't telling them not to cry anymore. He's just saying, cry for yourself instead. Because the day is going to come when you'll have wished that you wouldn't have brought children into this world, when when everything's going so wrong around you that you'll just be crying out in pain. So Jesus is actually quoting here. Sorry, I'm going to be looking at the notes in my Bible a few times for this because there's quite a lot. The sympathetic mourning and lamenting of the women leads Jesus to quote from the prophet Zechariah. The days are coming. Blessed are the barren. In those days the reproach of childlessness will be a blessing. So you know how we talk about inversions quite a lot in Luke? This is going to be one of those inversions where childlessness becomes a blessing, but this isn't in like a good sort of God's kingdom context. This is in a bad context. Jesus may here be referring to the siege that will happen in Jerusalem, the sort of fall of the city several years after his death. Because this is taking place in Jerusalem, he may be referring to that, he may be referring to other things, to other problems that happen in the immediate future, kind of coming out of Jesus' suffering. But I think one key quote just to pick out from there is he says, "For if they do these things when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?" So my Bible interprets the wood is green as being Jesus, and the wood that is dry as being the people. So if they do these things when the wood is green, if they crucify me, Jesus, if they do these things to me, how much worse will it be for my followers? How much worse will it be for normal people? That's the interpretation that my Bible offers, but I'm not so sure about that interpretation, because I think of the word when. It says, "For if they do these things when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?" And so I think this is more to do with like a timing thing. If they do this at this point in history, what will they do at that point in history? Because wood kind of, once you've cut it down, it goes from being green wood that doesn't burn very well to dry wood, which burns in an instant. So I think it's more of a timing thing, but I don't really know quite what Jesus is saying there. And so 2 others who were criminals were led away to be put to death with him. And when they came to the place that is called the Skull, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. So it's a really short account of Jesus actually being put onto the cross. I think each gospel does this. They don't kind of deliberate on kind of, and the nail went in here, and the nail went in here, and this and this and this, and they don't offer these graphic long descriptions. It's usually quite a short, simple description, and Luke it's very much so. It's there they crucified him. But Luke talks about the criminals who are on either side. Firstly, it's a place called the Skull. So there are a few different names for this place that come up. So the Skull is kind of, when it's been translated into English, Golgotha is another word that's used, and Calvary. Golgotha and Calvary basically mean the skull. They're kind of transliterations of the word the skull in other languages. So if you hear the Skull, Golgotha or Calvary, they're all kind of referring to the same place, this location where Jesus was crucified. And it's just kind of outside the city walls. It's quite a barren, kind of lifeless place. If you call a place the Skull, then you can imagine the kind of place it's going to be. But they crucified Jesus there, and the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. So this fulfills one of the prophecies in the Old Testament that we've mentioned in one of the last few videos, talking about Jesus being numbered with the transgressors. This is one of those times where Jesus gets numbered with the transgressors. So there are the transgressors, kind of the criminals. So there's 1, 2, 3 of them. Jesus is in the middle of them, so he is numbered with them. Now these guys are people who have been actually convicted and actually have done wrong, but we'll get onto them in a bit. First we've got a bit of what the Roman soldiers do once Jesus is up on the cross. But actually before we get to that, it would probably be quite good to just kind of touch briefly on what crucifixion actually is like. So it's going to be a bit sort of graphic and horrible, but that's what happened. So essentially you get a nail driven through each hand. There's a cross of wood, big timber frame, strong enough to hold a person. You get a nail on this side, nail on that side. I'm sorry, I can't stretch my hand much further than that. Nail on this side, nail on that side, hands go in, and then nails through your feet. And then you get sort of raised up and put upright on this cross with you hanging off. And the way you die is actually through kind of, it's a similar process to drowning, where your lungs kind of can't take it. It's putting tons of weird pressure on your body and stretching things, and yeah, it's just, your own body weight is kind of killing you very slowly, and you slowly kind of choke out, as well as the massive pain of having nails in your hands and feet. It's just a really, really horrible way to die. It's one of the most painful ways that sort of mankind has ever come up with, and most drawn out ways of dying. And so that's where Jesus is. He's in this state of kind of perpetual hanging pain for a long, long time. But in the midst of all that pain, this is what Jesus says. While he's hanging there, looking at the people who have hanged him, looking at the people who have put him up on this cross, he says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." So this shows the kind of the crazy amount of love and grace that Jesus has. And there are very few people who would be crucified, put up on a cross, and would be saying on that cross, Father, forgive them, to the people, like about the people who have just hung you there, about the people who have just chosen to execute you. It's a huge calling. It's a huge calling that Jesus is calling for forgiveness, even in the midst of this, crazy amount of pain that he's in. He's the Son of God, and he's come down to earth to save people, and they've decided to put him up on a cross. Even in that, Jesus is calling for these people to be forgiven. That's the huge amount of love that God has for us. And the people cast lots, dividing his garments. So these are the Roman soldiers. It mentions those Roman soldiers in other passages. Here it says, and they cast lots to divide his garments. So they basically take Jesus's things, and they have a bit of a gambling session about who takes what. And the people stood by watching, but the rulers scoffed at him, saying, he saved others, let him save himself, if he is the Christ of God, his chosen one. The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine, and saying, if you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. There was also an inscription over him, saying, this is the king of the Jews. So it isn't enough that Jesus is already hanging on this cross, that he's already sort of dying in this massively painful way, that he's been flogged and tortured within an inch of his life, that he's carried this cross through the streets, that he's had all of his possessions taken and sort of gambled with in front of his eyes. But now he has people coming up to him and mocking him. He has these soldiers making fun of him, saying, if you're the king of the Jews, save yourselves. He has the religious leaders sort of talking amongst themselves in front of him, saying, oh, let him save himself if he's the Christ of God. So they kind of see it as a test for God. You remember ages ago, we looked at when Jesus went into the wilderness and Satan came and tempted him. There was like one of the temptations was Satan saying, you know, if you're the Son of God, jump off this cliff and call for God's angels to catch you. And Jesus was saying, no, because you shouldn't test God. And that's exactly what these religious leaders are doing by putting Jesus on the cross. They're like, oh, if he's the Son of God, he'll climb down. They're kind of testing God in this moment. And the soldiers offer him sour wine, so Jesus would have been incredibly parched, incredibly thirsty. And they have this wine vinegar, and what they do is they dip a sponge into it and kind of hold up the sponge to him, and Jesus sucks this vinegar wine from the sponge. It's like, you know, if you're thirsty, that is the last thing you want to be drinking. You want to be drinking water, and they don't even give him that. And so the last little bit where it says, this is the King of the Jews. So you remember we talked before about how the King of the Jews was kind of given as a mocking title for Jesus. And they have that written above him. Normally what they do is they would put a sign on the cross itself saying what this person's guilty of. It might say murder, it might say treason. You know, it might call him a robber. This one just says King of the Jews. That's what Jesus is guilty of. That's what his title is on the cross. That's what his sentence is. He's sentenced as being King of the Jews, which is strangely is almost beautiful in a weird way, because that is exactly why he's on that cross. Is because he is the King of the Jews. But now through being on the cross, he becomes the King of everyone, the King of the whole world. But that's for a later video. For now, we have one last little bit of this passage to get through, and that is one of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us. So one of the guys on the cross is saying, look, save us, please. We're all going to die here. All three of us are going to die here, and it's going to be slow and it's going to be painful. If you have the power to do it, why don't you save us? Why don't you help us? And that's a call that a lot of us can make sometimes in times of real trouble and pain. You know, if we have someone close to us who's unwell or something like that, we can often make that call to God. It's like, look, God, you're able to do this. Save us. Save yourself. Come on. Stop this from happening. Help us. But in that moment, we don't see the bigger picture of what's actually going on. We'll see the bigger picture in sort of coming videos. But there is a bigger picture for Jesus being on this cross. There's a reason for him being here. And then he brings good things out of it. And so this criminal is kind of short-sighted in his call for Jesus to save them all. But the other one isn't. But the other soldier rebuked him, saying, the other soldier and the other criminal who's hanged with Jesus, the other criminal rebuked him, saying, do not fear God, since you are under the same sentence. Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? and we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." And he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your paradise." And Jesus said to him, truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." So this other criminal, even though he's convicted of something, we don't know what in Luke necessarily, but the other Gospels say that it's robbery. Even though they've been convicted of robbery, this soldier, I keep saying soldier, this other criminal who's hanging there is saying, "Look, this Jesus guy isn't guilty. I can see that he's the Son of God." He's saying, "Don't you realise what's happening here? Don't you fear God?" To the other criminal, he's rebuking him, he's telling him off, he's defending Jesus. And in doing so, he's showing this crazy amount of faith that he's just had. He says, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." That's both kind of a confession of faith, but it's also a plea to Jesus. It's saying, look, I believe in you, just please remember me. He isn't saying, bring me into your kingdom. He isn't saying, bless me with all this stuff. He's saying, just remember me. Just remember me when you get to your kingdom, and when you get into heaven. And so Jesus turns to this guy and he says, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." This is insane what Jesus has said here, because this guy is a convicted criminal. He's a convicted criminal to the point that he is being put to death. He is hanging on a cross, dying. He's the equivalent of a death row inmate today. He's someone who has been convicted of a very serious crime, found guilty, admits that he's guilty, is right on the brink of being put to death, and Jesus forgives him in that moment. He comes to Jesus with faith, and Jesus forgives him. So I don't know what situations you've been in your life. I don't know what you've done in your past, but chances are you haven't been put to death on a cross for committing crimes like this. This guy has had a huge step away from what God wants him to be. He's turned away from Jesus, turned away from God's plan massively. He's done huge sins to the point where he's been put on this cross, he's been convicted, he's ready to die, he's about to go. And in that moment he turns to Jesus and he confesses faith and he asks Jesus to help him, and Jesus does. That's amazing. That's so crazy that this criminal is forgiven in this moment. It's one of those things where I think God put this in the Bible so it's, to show us. It's like, look, anyone can be saved. Anyone can be saved at any point in their life. Even if it's right before the end, even if they've had the most evil, horrible life. If they turn to me honestly and they believe in me and they stand by my name and they have a change of heart, that person can be saved. And it's such a huge promise to us. And I love that today's passage ends on that. Because wow, in the midst of all this evil, all this horrible that's happened in Jesus' crucifixion, with people mocking him, with women crying, with Jesus saying, look, you're going to wish your children hadn't been born because your lives will be this bad going forwards. In the midst of all of this, we've got this beautiful little story of a convicted criminal being saved, of him coming to faith and him being rescued by Jesus, and Jesus promising him a place in heaven. It's amazing. It's amazing. So that's where we're going to end it today. Sorry, that was quite a long video, but there are going to be a couple long videos going forth now because there's some huge kind of theological concepts to explain. What we're reading right now is kind of the linchpin piece of the Bible. It's the key part. If you understand any part of the Bible, it should be this bit. So the videos are going to be slightly longer, but that's where we're going to end it today. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you all tomorrow. Bye bye bye.